The Saturday in Green Valley began like any other. Soft light through the evergreens. A thin gray that promised rain by afternoon, the steady, comforting steam of coffee from the kitchen. Julia Dawson moved through those familiar sounds and smells with a kind of small, practiced gestures that come from years of mornings spent arranging the ordinary into something gentle. A pot of coffee on, toast in the oven, a vase of wildflowers tightened into a neat knot on the island. She had been up early, revising a lecture in her head as she chopped fruit, thinking about metaphors and margins while her husband, Michael, fussed over silverware and guest placards as if the world hinged on the exact placement of a napkin. The house hummed, low, convivial. Michael's colleagues were folding the edges of conversation into polite laughter in the living room. A radio murmured jazz behind a clink of glasses. It should have felt like safety, people milling in a warm house, the kind of easy company that made a Saturday morning feel like a small holiday. Instead, as Julia set two plates side by side at the breakfast nook, a small movement at the doorway loosened the room like a sudden wind. Natalie stepped in as if she had only come to ask a question about homework. But she did not have the ordinary look of a 14-year-old trying to remember a due date. Her face was washed of color. The skin under her eyes had the faint, thin sheen of someone who had not slept. She moved with the habit of somebody trying not to be noticed. When she reached the island, she folded her hand around something small and crumpled and slipped it, quiet as a whisper, into Julia's palm. For a second, Julia thought it was a scrap of shopping list, or one of those little notes Natalie left for herself in the margins of her planner. She unfolded the paper, because that was what one did. She read the sentence and felt the room tilt. Pretend you're sick and leave now. It was only 5 words. The handwriting was a slanted teen hand, hurried, uneven, urgent. The world inside the blank kitchen contracted to that line and the small tremor in Natalie's hands. Julia's first reaction was the rational one, an attempt to translate the warning into something practical. Maybe a dare between friends, a prank, a misread, text printed and handed over as a joke. She looked up for a laugh from Natalie, something to break away from the unnatural stillness. Instead, she met her daughter's eyes and found there no hint of mischief, only a pressure, a fear that had nothing to do with teenage melodrama. "You okay, Nat?" she asked, voice steadier than she felt, the knife in her hand a trivial thing. Natalie's reply was a twitch of a smile that did not reach her eyes. "It's nothing. Can you check my essay later?" Before Julia could pry, Michael appeared in the doorway with a towel thrown over his shoulder, his tie undone in that casual, finished way men wear when they want to look like they do nothing at all. He smiled at Julia, perfectly clean, practiced, and asked where she wanted the coffee. Heat rose in Julia's throat like a private alarm. She felt the note burning in her palm. She thought of the guests, of the orders placed, of the small architecture of the morning that would be toppled by anything abrupt. She thought of Natalie's face, and then, with an impulse that felt at once like betrayal and a necessity, she touched her temples as if a migraine had come on suddenly. "I'm not feeling well," she said, and kept her voice even. "I think I should run out for something, get a stronger pill, sit for a few minutes." Michael's smile faltered in the corner. "Are you sure?" he asked, measuring the claim with that practiced curiosity that pretended to care. "You'll be fine. Do you need me to?" "No. I'll be back in 10, Julia lied, and she meant it in the only way she could. She looped her arm through Natalie's, and they left the house, swallowing the polite noise behind them, the front door closing on the soft murmur of a life that, in those 5 words, had become a threat. In the car, with the engine idling and the rain beginning to dust the windshield, Natalie's voice came out in one raw, single thread. "Mom, he's going to kill you." The road to the pharmacy was usually quiet this early, a curve of pines and morning mist threading between tidy lawns. But inside Julia's car, the silence felt like something alive, tight, waiting to speak. Natalie sat rigid in the passenger seat, clutching her phone. The note from earlier lay folded in Julia's coat pocket, its weight louder than the hum of the tires on wet asphalt. Julia tried to find a voice that would sound normal. "Honey, you scared me back there. What did you mean by that?" Natalie looked down, eyes swimming. The words scraping out one by one. "Last night, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs for water and I heard him in the office. He was on the phone. He said he'd slip something into your tea in the morning, that it would look like a heart attack." Julia's hands tightened on the wheel until the leather creaked. For a heartbeat, she wanted to laugh, to treat it as a teenage misunderstanding, a bad dream. Michael plotting murder? It was absurd. He was polished, rational, admired. Natalie, maybe you misheard. You know how late he works. He might have been joking with a client. But Natalie shook her head. She unlocked her phone, scrolling with trembling fingers. He wasn't joking. He said the word arsenic. He said, "It'll take 15 minutes. She won't feel a thing." Then he talked about the life insurance payout. She held the screen toward her mother. Julia blinked at the photographs. A scanned $1.2 million life insurance policy with her name listed as the insured. A screenshot of $180,000 in transfers from her personal savings to an account in Michael's name. A spreadsheet of business debts totaling over $400,000. The images were time-stamped, clear. Her breath thinned into small, shallow bursts. Every instinct wanted to reject it, call it a mix-up, an exaggeration. Anything that didn't shatter the life she had built. But Natalie's voice, steady in its fear, stripped away denial. "I took those pictures this morning. He left the office door open. Mom, I think he's desperate. He talked about how the insurance would clear all his debts." Julia pulled into the parking lot of a small pharmacy and parked without getting out. Her reflection in the windshield looked foreign. Pale, jaw trembling, a woman suddenly older. The morning drizzle blurred the world into gray. "If this is true," she said quietly, "we go to the police." Natalie shook her head fast. "Without proof, they'll think you're crazy. He'll say you're unstable. He already told people you've been forgetful. He's setting it up." Julia's mind flashed through the conversations she'd brushed off. Michael asking about her medications, joking to friends about her professor brain fog. Small seeds, planted carefully, the pattern locked into place. Her throat burned. "He's making a record," she whispered. "So if anything happens, it looks like I lost my mind." Natalie reached across the console, gripping her hand. "We can't run, Mom. He'll find us. We need proof, real proof." For the first time that morning, Julia looked straight into her daughter's eyes and saw not panic, but resolve. She turned the key in the ignition again. Rain slid down the windshield like tears made of glass. "Then we go back," she said softly. "We get the evidence. And this time, we don't let him control the story." Natalie nodded, silent but certain. As the car turned back toward Green Valley, the house that had once been their refuge waited like a stage where every gesture might decide who lived and who didn't. When they turned back toward Green Valley, the morning had already thinned into a gauze of mist and drizzle. The streets were empty. A few joggers moved under umbrellas, unaware that two people in a silver sedan were driving toward the edge of their own fear. Julia kept both hands fixed on the wheel. Her pulse thudded through her fingertips. Every instinct told her to run, to drive north, find a motel, call someone, but every logical part of her knew Michael would twist the story before she could even catch her breath. Natalie, still pale, spoke softly beside her. "If we just pretend everything's fine, he won't suspect. You act normal and I'll go upstairs. I'll look in his office. He keeps everything there." Julia nodded, though the idea made her stomach turn. "You'll only have a few minutes. Take pictures. Don't touch anything." The closer they came to home, the quieter the car became. The house appeared like a postcard. White shutters, trimmed hedges, the flagstone walkway glistening after the rain. It looked impossibly innocent. Julia parked and inhaled slowly, tasting metal in her mouth. When they stepped inside, the familiar smell of coffee and lemon polish clung to the air. Laughter still floated from the dining room. The brunch Michael had planned was in full swing. He was there at the center of it, confident, gracious, holding court with his friends from the company as though the morning had been carved out of perfection. He turned, spotted them, and beamed. "There you two are. Feel better?" Julia matched his energy with an effort that felt like walking a tightrope. "Much better," she said, forcing a lightness she didn't feel. "Just needed some air." He leaned in and kissed her cheek, and she felt the cold sweat on her own skin. "Good. We were about to start the champagne. Come. Join us." "Maybe in a bit," she said, touching her temple. Still a little light-headed. "I'll sit upstairs for a minute." He frowned slightly but shrugged, already turning back to his guests. "Of course. Natalie, make sure your mom doesn't faint on me." "Yes, sir," Natalie murmured, her voice small and obedient. Julia's lips tightened in a smile as they retreated toward the staircase. Each step creaked too loud. She felt every second stretching thin. At the landing, she whispered, "Straight to his office. Keep your phone ready." Natalie nodded and slipped down the hallway, light as breath. Julia lingered by the window, listening to the hum of conversation below, the clinking of glass, the easy laughter of men who didn't know they were standing in a house built over deceit. She looked at her reflection in the glass, calm, composed, every line of her face trained into civility. Downstairs, Michael's voice rose in a toast, booming and certain. Upstairs, silence swallowed everything. Minutes passed. Julia's heartbeat seemed to echo against the walls. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard sighed the small, distinct sound of movement. Then her phone buzzed once in her hand. A single message from Natalie. Found something. Julia exhaled shakily, straightened her blouse, and glanced toward the stairs where the laughter below still flowed. Whatever mask she had left would have to hold a little longer. The message appeared on Julia's phone with the force of a gunshot. Found it. She rose from the chair near the upstairs landing, forcing a composed breath before descending partway to the dining room. "Michael!" she called lightly, resting a hand on the banister. "I'm just going to check on Natalie. She's still feeling a little dizzy." He turned, half listening while topping off a guest's glass. "Sure, sweetheart. Don't let her sleep all day. We'll eat soon." His smile was impeccable, the kind that charmed investors and neighbors alike. Julia nodded, keeping her tone even. "I'll be right back." Then she turned and climbed the rest of the stairs, every step echoing louder than it should have. Natalie was in Michael's office, a small room tucked behind the guest bedroom. The blinds were half drawn, the air faintly scented with his cologne and printer ink. The girl stood frozen by the desk, phone raised, eyes wide and glassy. "Mom," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "Look." Julia approached slowly, her pulse thudding in her throat. In the open drawer lay a small amber vial, no label, just a clear glass body and a black cap reflecting the thin line of light from the window. Natalie had already taken several pictures. Next to the drawer sat a legal pad filled with Michael's crisp handwriting. Julia bent closer. The top line read, "Guests 10:30. Tea 11:45. Effect 15-20 minutes. 12:10 call ambulance." Her stomach dropped. The letters swam. This was no mistake, no misheard fragment of a phone call. It was a plan, precise and clinical. Her husband had scheduled her death the way he scheduled everything else. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her mind jumped between details, his easy smile that morning, the way he'd offered her tea, the insurance papers. She forced herself to swallow and think. "We have enough. Take the paper, too. Careful. Use a napkin. Don't leave prints. Natalie reached out, still shaking, but before she could grasp the notepad, a sound froze them both. The low creak of the floorboard at the end of the hall. Julia's head snapped up. The rhythm of the steps was unmistakable, measured, confident. Michael. She turned to her daughter, voice barely above breath. Put the vial back. Close the drawer. Now. Natalie obeyed, sliding the wood shut just as the doorknob rattled. Julia caught her daughter's wrist and spun her around, arranging her like a mirror image of normality, just as Michael pushed the door open. There you two are, he said, smiling too easily. His gaze moved across the room, lingering on the desk, on Julia's hand still gripping Natalie's wrist. Everything okay? Fine, Julia replied, forcing a soft laugh. She just wanted to show me something for school. Natalie added quickly, a poem I wrote. Michael's eyes narrowed, but the smile stayed. He held a cup in one hand, steam curling from its rim. Well, since you're both up here, you should try this. Made it just the way you like it. Jules, chamomile with honey. Julia's stomach turned. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. That's sweet of you, she said carefully, but my head's still pounding. Maybe later. He stepped closer, the porcelain catching light. Just a sip. It'll help you relax. No, really. She smiled faintly, holding his gaze. You go enjoy the party. I'll be down in a minute. For the first time that morning, his smile cracked. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by something still and watchful. After a long pause, he nodded. Suit yourself. He turned toward the door. The air between them felt brittle, ready to shatter. Julia waited until his shoes clicked down the hallway, but instead of fading, the sound stopped just beyond the threshold. A faint metallic clink followed, one she recognized instantly. The twist of a lock. She ran to the door and tested the handle. It didn't move. Michael's voice floated back, calm, almost amused. Take a rest, both of you. You'll feel better soon. Julia pressed her forehead against the door, listening as his footsteps receded. In the silence that followed, Natalie whispered, he knows. Julia swallowed hard, scanning the room for another exit, her mind snapping into motion. Then we don't have much time, she said. We get out now. The handle didn't budge. Julia twisted it again, harder this time, but the lock held fast. Panic rose in her throat like smoke. He locked us in, she whispered. Natalie stood frozen, pale as chalk. The house below had gone eerily quiet, the kind of silence that waits right before something breaks. Julia's mind spun through possibilities. The window. It was the only way. She limped to the corner of the room, pulling the curtains aside. The glass was cold under her fingertips, slick with the mist that had crept in from the rain outside. Beyond it lay the backyard, a stretch of trimmed grass, the cedar fence at the far end, and the narrow alley behind the property. They were on the second floor. A fall from this height could break a leg, maybe worse. But staying meant something far more final. We're not trapped, she said, voice low but fierce. Help me. Natalie blinked, coming back to herself. Julia stripped the sheets from the bed with quick, sharp movements, tying them together into a makeshift rope. Her fingers trembled but didn't stop. We'll tie it to the leg of the desk. You'll go first. A noise below made her flinch, Michael's voice calling her name, that sing-song warmth barely disguising the edge beneath. Julia? Honey? Where are you? You don't have to hide. Julia's stomach turned. The edge of the desk bit into her palm as she knotted the fabric tighter. She could hear drawers slamming, his footsteps moving closer to the stairs. Mom. Natalie's voice cracked. Go, Julia said. Now. Natalie climbed onto the windowsill, gripping the sheet rope. The cold wind caught her hair as she swung one leg out. Below, the garden looked impossibly far. You can do this, sweetheart. Just hold tight and don't look down. I'm scared. I know, but you're stronger than you think. Natalie nodded once, then began her descent. The fabric stretched, creaking softly. Julia watched, breath held, until her daughter's shoes hit the damp grass. Natalie stumbled, but stayed on her feet. Relief surged through Julia so quickly it made her dizzy. Then Michael's footsteps thundered up the stairs. Julia! She didn't think. She just climbed. The rope swung wildly under her weight, fabric fibers straining. The cold hit her lungs like glass. She was halfway down when the door upstairs rattled, then burst open. Michael's shout tore through the air. Julia! What the hell are you doing? She looked up just long enough to see his silhouette in the window, the fury twisting his face into something she barely recognized. She let go. The landing wasn't graceful. She hit the ground hard, pain shooting up her leg. For a second, the world tilted. Gray sky, wet grass, the sharp burn in her ankle. But Natalie was there, gripping her shoulders. Mom, get up, please. Julia forced herself upright, biting back a cry. Run. They cut across the yard, shoes slipping on mud, the sound of Michael shouting fading into the downpour. Behind them, the back door slammed open. A car engine roared to life. Come on. Julia gasped. They reached the fence, a tall stretch of cedar damp from rain. Natalie climbed first, hands raw, pulling herself over with a grunt. Julia followed, her injured ankle screaming, but adrenaline drove her. She dropped to the other side, almost collapsing. From the street came the echo of tires skidding, the low growl of an engine turning down the next block. He was looking for them. They ran through puddles, past manicured lawns and flickering porch lights. Every breath a burst of cold air. The drizzle had thickened to rain, washing their footprints into nothing. Julia's ankle throbbed, but she didn't stop. Natalie led the way, her small frame darting ahead like instinct itself. When they reached the edge of Oswego Park, the world opened into trees and fog. They slipped between the trunks, breaths ragged, until the sound of the street was swallowed by the steady hush of rain on leaves. Julia collapsed onto a bench near the lake, clutching Natalie close. For the first time since the note, she allowed herself to breathe. The water beyond the mist looked endless, and somewhere behind them, in that shining, monstrous house, her husband was realizing that his plan had failed. But this wasn't safety, not yet. The night would come soon, and with it, choices they hadn't yet dared to make. Julia brushed the wet hair from her daughter's face and whispered, "We made it out, baby. But this isn't over." They crouched on a wet bench beneath an oak, the park around them a bowl of hush and drizzle. Natalie's phone glowed between them, tiny, decisive proof that made the world feel suddenly brittle. She tapped through the photos with fingers that shook, the amber vial, the legal pad with the schedule scrawled in Michael's hand, a screenshot of the life insurance document with Julia's name as insured, and a bank alert showing $180,000 moved from Julia's account to an account in Michael's name. Each file carried a timestamp. Each timestamp pinned the plan to a time and a face. Julia read the pad again until the letters blurred. Guests 10:30, T 11:45, effect 15-20 minutes, 12:10 call ambulance. Her throat closed. She felt both naked and armored at once. Naked because the plan was so precise, armored because now it was no longer suspicion, but fact on a screen. A distant rumble of engines intruded on the quiet, a low, orchestrated sound that multiplied into the wet air. Julia looked up before Natalie spoke. "He called the neighborhood patrol," Natalie said, the words small and certain. "I heard him tell Mark to sweep the alleys." The thought of uniformed security combing the lanes sent a cold vertigo through Julia. If they stayed in sight, they would be boxed in. If they fled without a plan, they might be painted as fugitives. She thought of the locked door, of the vial sliding into the drawer. of the legal pad that read like a schedule for her disappearance. "Okay," Julia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need to move, fast but not recklessly. We go where there are cameras, people. Public places." She felt the old professor in her, an instinct for pattern and evidence. Visibility is protection. Documentation is currency. Natalie scrolled to another image, an emailed PDF with an e-signature at the bottom. M. Dawson. The font was neat, the kind used by insurance brokers when quoting policies. The signature matched the handwriting on the pad. The possibility that Michael had engineered the insurance, wired money away, and drafted the timing like a contractor scheduling subcontractors, settled over Julia like a wet cloak. They stood and moved through the park, damp leaves smearing along their shoes. On the far side of the grounds, an access gate led to the maintenance road that cut behind the houses. Julia reached into her bag and pulled out the small plastic key card she'd been issued as a resident, a petty convenience she had used 100 times without thinking. It clicked open the service gate with a polite beep and a soft mechanical sigh. The narrow road let them out onto a quieter side street, away from cul-de-sac driveways and the polite watchfulness of neighbors' porches. Julia's hand shook as she thumbed the rideshare app. Her thumbs hovered a moment, a small reluctance in the face of so much happening. Then she booked the nearest ride to Bridgeport Village Mall, a cluster of storefronts and mid-morning foot traffic 18 minutes away, with an abundance of cameras and security. Public, predictable, and full of witnesses. While they waited, Julia dialed with a dry, precise motion. Margaret Lane answered on the second ring, voice low and brisk. "Julia, where are you?" Margaret's tone shifted instantly when Julia explained. No shock. Only the efficient gravity of a lawyer who'd seen fate pivot on the edge of a single piece of paper. "Stay where you are," Margaret said without hesitation. "Don't talk to anyone. Especially do not speak to the police until I get there. If anyone pressures you, ask for an officer's name. And tell them you want your attorney present. Do you have the photos? Back them up. Email them to me and upload them to a cloud account under my name. Don't delete anything. I'm on my way." Julia's fingers moved as ordered. Natalie forwarded files, and the images left her phone for another server. Copies, redundancies. The car arrived with a courteous beep. The driver lifted the hatch and looked up with the ordinary concern of a stranger who asks none of the questions that mattered. Bridgeport Village felt like an island of ordinary life. Parents with strollers, a barista wiping down the counter, a security kiosk with a bored attendant. The mall's cameras focused naturally on storefronts and parking lanes. That invisibility within visibility, the fact of being watched by machines, not people, was exactly what Julia wanted. Cameras could not be charmed or lied to. They recorded what hands and faces could not always deny. As they walked toward the glass doors, the rain blurred the world into streaks. Each step was measured, each breath careful. For the first time since the note, she felt that they were doing something other than reacting, that they were shaping the narrative, getting ahead of a story someone else had begun to write for them. The first to arrive weren't Margaret's people, but the police. 2 patrol cars slid up to the curb outside Bridgeport Village, lights pulsing red against the rain. Julia spotted them through the glass storefront and felt her pulse stutter. They were efficient, calm, the way officers are when they think they already know what's true. One approached, the other circled toward the mall entrance. "Mrs. Dawson?" the taller one asked, voice flat but polite. "I'm Officer Grant. This is Officer Morales. Your husband contacted us. He's concerned for your safety." Julia's jaw tightened. "My safety?" "Yes, ma'am. He reported that you may be having a psychological episode and have taken your daughter without proper supervision. He said you've been under stress and possibly confused about, well, some personal matters." For a moment, Julia just stared. She could see Michael's hand all over the phrasing. Calm, rational, professional. It was the perfect countermeasure to what she'd found. He'd set the trap so cleanly that she could almost admire it if it hadn't been her life collapsing inside it. Natalie stepped forward, chin trembling. That's not true. He tried to poison her. I heard him. Officer Morales gave the kind of look adults give teenagers who've seen too many thrillers. Okay, let's slow down, sweetheart. Why don't we all sit somewhere quiet and talk this out? Julia swallowed hard. No, she said evenly. We're not hysterical. And we're not going anywhere until my attorney arrives. We have proof. She turned to Natalie. Show them. Natalie unlocked her phone and pulled up the photos, the vial, the notepad, the insurance policy. She held the screen out. The officers exchanged a glance, professionalism flickering under the surface of practiced neutrality. Grant leaned in slightly. Ma'am, I can't confirm authenticity on a cell phone. We'll need to go to the station and document this properly. Julia's voice was calm, but her hands were ice. You'll forgive me if I'm hesitant to leave a public area when the man who locked us in a room less than an hour ago is the one filing reports. Morales's tone softened just a fraction. We just want to make sure everyone's safe. Before Julia could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Firm, articulate, commanding. They're safe with me. Margaret Lane strode across the tiled floor, rain still glistening on her trench coat. She flashed a leather case with a practiced motion. Margaret Lane. Oregon Bar Association number 26714. Mrs. Dawson is my client. Her tone made it clear that this wasn't up for debate. Officer Grant straightened, taking the ID. Counselor. Margaret met his gaze evenly. My client will cooperate fully, but will be coming voluntarily, not under suggestion that she's unstable. You will also note that she has already preserved photographic evidence and contacted legal representation prior to your arrival. Grant's posture shifted, less authority now. More caution. Morales nodded slightly, stepping back. Of course, ma'am. We just need statements for the record. You'll get them, Margaret said. At the precinct. With me present. The officers exchanged another glance, then gestured toward the exit. All right, let's proceed calmly. As they walked toward the patrol cars, Julia felt the air loosen around her for the first time all day. Not because she trusted the system, but because she knew Michael had lost control of the narrative. For years, he'd spoken for her. Smooth, believable, unchallenged. Now, for the first time, she had someone else speaking back. At the Oregon State Police Headquarters, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain-soaked coats. Julia sat in the small interview room with Margaret beside her, a steady wall of calm in a dark blazer and composed expression. Across the table, a detective typed quietly while another arranged evidence bags. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights filling every pause. Julia clasped her hands to keep them from trembling. Margaret had already made sure that Natalie was in the adjacent room, giving her statement with an officer trained to interview minors. On the table lay Natalie's phone, unlocked, displaying the photographs. The vial in Michael's drawer, the handwritten note detailing the T-schedule, and the e-signed insurance documents. I need to be clear, Julia began, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. My husband planned it. He's heavily in debt. And I found proof of his life insurance policy on me. My daughter overheard him making the plan last night. The detective nodded without comment, eyes flicking to the screen. We've documented these images, he said, and your attorney has forwarded digital copies to our secure server. We'll need to confirm the authenticity of the insurance paperwork. Margaret leaned slightly forward, which will be simple enough. The policy number traces directly to Evergreen Mutual. We've already requested a verification call. A knock at the door broke the rhythm. The detective opened it, and there he was, Michael Dawson, in a pressed shirt and his usual quiet confidence, escorted by 2 officers. His hair was damp from the rain, his smile perfectly measured. He looked the part of the worried husband, a man thrust into chaos by someone else's unraveling. "Julia," he said gently, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "Thank God you're here. I've been worried sick." He turned to the detectives. "My wife's been under a lot of pressure lately. Her mother passed recently, and she's had some delusions. Our family doctor, Dr. Vlasov, diagnosed her with generalized anxiety disorder. He prescribed medication, but she's been skipping doses. I'm afraid she's having another episode." Julia felt something icy crawl up her spine. Margaret didn't flinch. She folded her hands, eyes steady. "Dr. Vlasov," she repeated. "Can you provide that doctor's license number, Mr. Dawson?" Michael blinked, caught off guard by the tone. "Excuse me." Margaret's voice sharpened. "You're making a formal claim that a licensed physician diagnosed and medicated my client for a psychiatric condition. Oregon law requires verifiable credentials for such a statement. So again, license number, practice address, and prescription record." The room went still. The detectives looked between them. Michael's smile faltered. His office is private in Lake Grove. I don't have the number on me." Margaret didn't move. "That's convenient." Michael's composure cracked, just slightly, enough for Julia to see the glint beneath the charm, the calculation, the anger he tried to hide. The detective typed something, quickly, eyes narrowing. "We'll verify that," he said quietly. Michael tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "Please, you're taking this too far. My wife, she's confused." Margaret leaned back, her tone soft but edged with steel. "My client may be many things, Mr. Dawson. Confused isn't one of them. You, however, just perjured yourself on record." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that bends air. Outside the glass panel, Julia could see Natalie sitting in the next room, clutching a cup of water, her reflection faint but solid. Proof that truth, once spoken, doesn't disappear. Detective Raymond Lee entered the room with the measured calm of a man who knew the next few minutes would change everything. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing in a silence thick enough to taste. Julia felt her stomach knot. Margaret's hand brushed briefly against her arm in a quiet signal, steady now. Lee placed a manila folder on the table and opened it. "We finished processing the samples from your residence," he began, his tone even, methodical. "Specifically, the trace evidence from the living room carpet near the desk and the residue on the teacup we retrieved." Julia's breath caught. She watched his face for clues, but he kept it neutral as he laid out the photographs. A reddish stain on the cream carpet, a glass cup half filled with amber liquid, a small plastic evidence bag labeled substance possible arsenic compound. He turned to Michael, who sat across the table, his confident posture beginning to stiffen. "The blood on the carpet," Lee continued, "was initially assumed to belong to Mrs. Dawson or her daughter, but DNA analysis confirmed otherwise. It's yours, Mr. Dawson." Michael's jaw tensed. "That's impossible," he snapped. "I cut myself shaving, maybe." Lee cut him off, his voice sharper now. "The sample isn't from a shaving cut. It came from a fresh wound on your right palm. The same hand witnesses saw bandaged when you greeted guests this morning. Care to explain how your blood ended up in the same area where the vial of arsenic was recovered?" The words seemed to strike Michael physically. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. For a fleeting second, Julia saw the facade crumble, the easy smile, the calm precision, all of it slipping. Lee laid another photo on the table. The vial, its cap dusted with fingerprint powder. "We found this in the bottom drawer of your desk, Mr. Dawson. The substance inside tested positive for arsenic trioxide. Your fingerprints are all over it." The same compound was present in the teacup you offered your wife. Michael's chair scraped violently against the floor as he stood, face twisted with panic. You can't prove anything. She planted it. She's been trying to ruin me for months. The detectives moved instantly. Morales stepped forward, one hand on his holster. Sit down, sir. But Michael didn't. He turned on Julia, eyes wild, his voice rising into a raw, desperate growl. You think you can destroy me? After everything I gave you? Julia barely had time to react before he lunged. Chairs toppled, the table shuddered, and Margaret shoved Julia back just as Morales and Grant tackled him to the ground. The clang of metal filled the room, the unmistakable click of handcuffs. Michael Dawson, Detective Lee said, voice cold now. You're under arrest for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and falsification of medical records. Michael's struggle slowed. He looked up at Julia through the curtain of his own rage and disbelief. For years, that gaze had frozen her, controlling, commanding, impossible to contradict. But now, in the harsh light of the interrogation room, it was nothing more than a reflection of his own ruin. As the officers led him out, his voice cracked into a hoarse shout. Julia, you'll regret this. She didn't answer. The door slammed and the echo lingered. Julia turned toward Natalie, who had been waiting in the hallway. The girl rushed into her arms, trembling. For the first time that day, Julia allowed herself to cry, not with fear, but with the release of someone who had survived the impossible. They held each other in silence, 2 heartbeats steady against the noise of the station. The nightmare was ending. Not cleanly, not easily, but ending all the same. Night had fallen by the time the last interview ended. The corridors of the Oregon State Police headquarters were quiet, lit by the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. Julia and Natalie sat together on a worn bench outside the detective unit, exhaustion carved into their faces. The adrenaline that had kept them alive through the day had finally ebbed, leaving only a deep, trembling stillness. Detective Raymond Lee returned with a folder tucked under his arm. He crouched slightly so his voice wouldn't echo. Mrs. Dawson, we've confirmed everything, he said gently. Your husband's been charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and financial forgery. The investigation shows he falsified your medical records to support his claim of mental instability and transferred funds from your personal savings to cover business debts. He hesitated before adding, the insurance company confirmed he personally initiated the $1.2 million policy 6 months ago, listing himself as the beneficiary. Julia's hands clasped together in her lap. She nodded slowly, every word striking like a dull hammer. So it's over, she said, her voice almost a whisper. For now, Lee replied. The house is sealed as a crime scene. You can't return there tonight. Your lawyer mentioned she's arranging a temporary residence for you and your daughter. When he left, Margaret reappeared with a tired smile. Her hair had fallen from its bun, her voice softer now. You both did everything right, she said. But Julia, don't go back home yet. The warrant's still active and forensics will be in and out through tomorrow. I've booked you an apartment in downtown Portland, quiet, safe, and close to me. Julia met her eyes, the gratitude too heavy for words. I don't even know how to thank you. Start by getting some rest, Margaret said, pressing a hand to her shoulder. Tomorrow we'll talk about next steps, custody, asset protection, and your safety order. Tonight, you breathe. By the time they reached the small apartment Margaret had arranged, it was nearly midnight. Rain streaked the windows, painting the city in silver lines. The space was clean but unfamiliar, bare walls, the faint scent of new carpet, a single lamp casting warm light across the couch where Natalie sat curled under a blanket. For a long while neither spoke. The television murmured softly in the background, showing the local weather, indifferent to everything that had just happened. Finally, Natalie's voice broke the quiet. "Mom," she said, her tone hesitant, "did he ever love us?" Julia turned, studying her daughter's profile, the tired eyes, the streak of mud still clinging to her shoes from the park. The question lingered in the air like smoke, impossible to answer without reopening every wound. After a long silence, she said softly, "People like him don't love, sweetheart. They just use. They use whatever makes them look stronger. Your trust, your kindness, your fear." Natalie's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She leaned against her mother's shoulder, the small gesture saying everything words couldn't. Julia rested her head lightly against her daughter's hair. The city hummed below, alive and distant. For the first time in years, the silence around them felt clean, painful, yes, but honest. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing away the last traces of the life they'd escaped. And in that quiet apartment, Julia Dawson finally allowed herself to believe in tomorrow. The courtroom was full long before the judge entered. Reporters lined the back wall. Cameras forbidden, but pencils flying, capturing every breath of a case that had become the talk of Oregon. The story had everything the media craved: wealth betrayal, a mother's near death, a daughter's courage. Headlines called it the Green Valley Poison Plot, and Natalie, once a quiet 14-year-old, was now known as the daughter who saved her mother. Julia sat beside Margaret in the second row, her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't wanted the attention, the interviews, the sympathy, the relentless coverage, but she understood why the story resonated. The courtroom lights felt harsh, the air too still, yet she sat there not as a victim, but as someone determined to see things through. When Michael was led in, dressed in an orange jumpsuit and shackled, a ripple passed through the gallery. The man who had once commanded rooms with charm and authority now looked smaller, his eyes hollow. His composure cracked. He didn't look at Julia or Natalie, though she could feel his presence like static in the air. The prosecutor laid out the evidence with clinical precision. The arsenic traces in the tea, the financial transfers, the falsified insurance documents, the fabricated medical file naming a non-existent Dr. Vlasov. Each fact landed like a nail in a coffin. Detectives testified. Forensic chemists detailed the residue found in his drawer, and witnesses confirmed his mounting debts and obsession with his company's downfall. When Natalie took the stand, the courtroom fell utterly silent. Her voice was soft but unwavering as she recounted the night she overheard the phone call, the note she'd written, the moment she saw her mother drink from that same cup. The judge watched her carefully, perhaps struck by how a teenager had held more courage in a single night than most adults muster in a lifetime. By the end of the week, the verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, insurance fraud, and financial forgery. The judge's tone was grave as he delivered the sentence. 30 years in state prison for the attempted murder, 15 for the fraud to be served consecutively, and, by order of the court, the death of his first wife, once ruled a heart failure, would be reopened under suspicion of arsenic poisoning. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbling furiously. Michael stood motionless, his jaw clenched, eyes dark with disbelief. His attorney whispered something, but the words bounced off the walls like dust. For the first time, Julia saw no performance left in him, no pretense of civility or power, only a hollow man caught by his own web. When the gavel struck, Julia didn't feel triumph. No vindication, no sweetness in the justice, just a quiet, aching relief. The truth had finally been spoken aloud, and that was enough. As Michael was led away, Natalie slipped her hand into her mother's. The cameras outside would wait, but Julia had no interest in being anyone's headline. She had seen enough of what performance could destroy. Justice, she realized, wasn't about revenge, it was about release. And as they walked out into the crisp Oregon air, the sound of rain beginning again against the courthouse steps, she felt that for the first time in years, Her life was no longer something written by someone else. A soft drizzle painted the skyline of Portland in silver when the story came full circle. A year had passed since that day in Green Valley, and life had found a quieter rhythm. Julia Dawson now rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment near Laurelhurst Park, close enough for morning walks and far enough from the shadows of her old life. The apartment smelled faintly of rosemary and coffee. Natalie's laughter echoed from the kitchen as she tried to flip pancakes, scattering flour everywhere. She was 15 now, taller, steadier, her laughter no longer haunted. For the first time in years, Julia felt at peace just watching her daughter move freely through a space that was truly theirs. The doorbell chimed, and when Julia opened it, she found Margaret Lane standing there, umbrella dripping, a warm smile softening her lawyer's sharp edges. "Still raining," she said, stepping inside. "Some things in Oregon never change." Julia poured her a cup of coffee, and they settled around the small table by the window, where the city lights shimmered through the mist. Margaret set down a thin envelope and slid it across the table. "It's official," she said. The appellate court upheld the revised sentence. After the retrial on his first wife's case, Michael was given life imprisonment without parole. Julia's breath left her in a slow, measured exhale. "Life," she repeated quietly as if tasting the word. Margaret nodded. The evidence from the reopened file was irrefutable. The arsenic traces matched, the financial pattern repeated. "He won't get another chance." Julia didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She only looked out the window for a long moment, watching the rain trace lines across the glass. There was no triumph left in her, only peace. Fragile but real. Margaret continued, "There's something else. The court approved your restitution claim. The insurance company settled $300,000 in damages for financial manipulation and emotional distress. It's not fortune, but it's a start." Julia nodded slowly. "More than enough to build again." Margaret rose to leave soon after, but before she did, she placed a gentle hand on Julia's shoulder. "You did it, Julia. You didn't just survive. You won quietly with grace. That's rarer than any verdict." After she left, the apartment fell into a warm hush. Natalie peeked from the kitchen, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "Dinner's ready," she said. They sat together at the table, the rain whispering outside, the city breathing softly below. Julia lifted her glass. "To new beginnings." "To peace," Natalie added. They clinked glasses, the sound bright and delicate. After dinner, Julia walked to the bookshelf in the living room, where a small wooden box rested among her papers. She opened it carefully. Inside lay a single, creased piece of paper. Natalie's note from that morning a year ago. "Pretend you're sick and leave now." Julia traced the faded handwriting with her fingertip. The edges were worn. The ink faint, but the message remained simple, urgent, and the reason they were still alive. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. Outside, thunder rolled far away, but inside, everything was still. As she folded the note back into the box, her voice came soft, reflective, almost like a closing line in a story only she and her daughter truly understood. Sometimes, to survive, you have to pretend you're strong until one day you realize you truly are